I wonder what bull is hiding in here. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I have this beautiful piece of black cherry that we're going to turn into hopefully a beautiful live edge bowl. I'm hoping to turn a relatively thin or a very thin bowl that will dry pretty quickly. This wood was cut a few months ago. It still has a lot of moisture in it, but if we turn the wall really thin of this bowl, it will dry in the matter of a couple days. And when it does, it's probably not going to move too much. It will contract a bit on the side walls, but not too much. And it's going to turn out to be a really nice piece. I got a good feeling about this one. So I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw. We're going to split this in two, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's see how it turns out. All right, I always like to mark the center of the log or where I'm going to cut. And it's a good idea to go ahead and take a marker and mark that. And then take your time running this through the bandsaw. Now, I'm cutting with the long grain, and this can be somewhat problematic. The bandsaw can get choked up real easy with these long shavings. So take your time, and you're going to want to make sure you clean out your bandsaw after you make this pass. But a good sharp blade and a thick tooth blade. This is at 3 teeth per inch, so this is a pretty coarse blade. It'll do a real good job of cutting that. I'm going to mount this to the lathe end to end using my 4-spur drive center, and I need to get a good contact with those jaws of the spur, so I'm going to clear off some of the bark. I want to make sure I'm finding the exact center point of both the face and the bottom and the top of the bowl blank. So just take my time and measure those off and find the center and then mark it. If you're off, say a ½ inch or a centimeter or so, the problem is that by the time you round out your bowl, you're going to take off a full inch or 2 centimeters, and then you're basically wasting material. But if you take your time and find the center, you're going to be fine. Now here, what I need to do is I need to balance the top of the bowl so that both of the wings are at the same height when the bowl is seated on a tabletop. So I'm checking where the top of this log sits, and I'm adjusting for that. I need to make a slight correction here. So I'm going to loosen the tailstock, adjust it, and then tighten it back up. Now, if you see the flat side of this log, it's really out of balance, but that doesn't matter. That's going to get all shaved down, and it will become the bottom of the bowl. Using my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, I'm going to rough out the corners of this piece. I find that it's much easier just to round these corners and take them down that way versus cutting a circle with the bandsaw. Also, if I were to cut a circle with the bandsaw, I might cut into the material too much. You saw the blank come to a stop there. Well, that'll happen if the material is loosened up in that 4-spur drive center. I just basically need to remember to tighten up the tailstock periodically. Especially when you're first turning a piece like this, those tailstock and the spur will drive in, and then they will become a little bit loose from all of the turning and the vibration. There you just see it hung up there for a moment, and then he's tighten that tailstock and keep going. This black cherry is very nice to turn. It's several months since it was taken down, but the wood is still very moist and it's cutting very, very nicely. I'm going to square up the bottom of this bowl. I'm going to take down the high spot and level this off. Now I use my 5/8 inch bowl gouge for roughing, And that's just as it sounds. I'm basically roughing out material quickly. I'm not real concerned with making a finished surface here. I just want to get the bulk of the material removed and create the shape of the bowl. So I'll go ahead and mark the tenon. And then I'll work down the cylinder shape of the tenon and then the shoulder. Now the reason I do this now and get this established is this will become the base of the bowl. So now I have a connecting point where I'm starting from the bottom of the bowl up to the top of the rim. And with a live edge bowl like this, I know that I'm going to go right up to the top of those wings. So I've got a point A to a point B location. Here I'm going to go ahead and make the dovetail angle using my spindle detail gouge. I want to make sure my shoulder is nice and flat there and clean out any debris that might be down in the crevice or the corner of that dovetail joint. Okay, so with the tenon and the shoulder established, now I can continue making the curve of the bottom of the exterior of this bowl. So you can see I'm making relatively deep passes here and removing quite a bit of material all at once. I'm shifting my body weight, which if you had a chance to see my video about how to move your body when you're turning, you know that my upper body is not doing any motion at all. It's all in the lower body and the shifting of my body weight. All right, so I needed to do a couple pull cuts there to establish the bottom portion right off that shoulder, and then I'm working my way up to the top of the wings of the bowl. The bark on this bowl is relatively thin, however, it's very wet, and the cambium layer underneath the bark is wet as well, so it's not bonding very well, and I'm concerned that it's probably going to come off. If it does, then this will become a natural edge bowl instead of a live edge bowl. But here I'm going to make a cut against the supported grain to attempt to keep that bark intact, and I'm using my lighter bowl gouge. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. Now I get asked pretty often, when I say 1/2 inch, what am I referring to? Is that the flute size or the size of the shaft? Well, we measure by the size of the shaft in North America, and I guess in Europe and England they measure the flute size. So when I say 1/2 inch, some people think that I'm talking about a 1/2 inch flute, but I'm actually talking about a 1/2 inch total diameter of the shank of this tool. So I believe the flute width of this tool is 3/8 of an inch. So there you saw I cleaned up that top edge, and now I'm using a shear scrape or a scraping cut. I've got the flute just a little bit open, so it's becoming a little bit more aggressive than a shear scrape. But I'm using this scraping technique with the lower wing of the bowl gouge to shape the curve of the exterior of the bowl. Now, if you've watched me for any length of time, you know that I strongly believe that the exterior of the bowl is the bowl. So take your time and make that really nice. All right, I'm just noticing that the bowl gouge is not performing as well as it could, so it's time to go over to the sharpening station. When you have your sharpening station set up and everything's in place, it only takes a few passes across the wheel to refine that edge and get it nice and crisp again. If you need to learn about sharpening your tools and shaping your tools, for instance, if you want to try this 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, then check out my Tool Sharpening online e-course. In that course, I'm going to share with you not only how to sharpen, but how to shape all of your bowl turning tools. So check that out. Now look at the shavings that are coming off here. These are a little bit thicker when I'm going around the side. This isn't quite a pull cut, but it's also not quite a shear scrape. Shear scrape creates these really, really fine shavings. And It's very close to a shear scrape, but I had a little bit of extra bulk material I needed to get away from there. Now here I'm positioning the tool rest. It looks a little weird, but I'm positioning the tool rest so I have a 90-degree support or perpendicular support for the tool. Now I'm being very careful not to press my tool into the bowl. I'm gliding the tool back and forth on the tool rest only and allowing the bowl to be shaved by that tool. If I try to push the tool into the bowl, I'm going to get nasty catches with those wings coming around. Instead, I'm just shaving off the high spots on that wing area and blending all of those areas together, and I'm removing those tool marks that were left behind from earlier. Now this is a shear scrape. Very, very light. I'm using the lower wing of the bowl gouge only. It's looking pretty good. There's still some tool marks there in the middle in the transition area. And those are a little deeper than both the other surfaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down just a touch deeper at the base, and then I'm going to work my way up to that area. Now if I were trying to make a push cut pass across this, I'm going to remove probably too much material. Instead, I'm going to do a pull scrape here. You can see those shavings are a little bit thicker. I'm going to do a pull scrape to level off that bottom and establish the curve of the bowl. And then I'm going to switch over and close the flute just a little bit more up against the bowl and create a shear scrape. So I've got a nice, subtle, smooth transition between those areas. And that's looking much better. When you use the shear scrape, you don't need to do much sanding at all. And it's super nice. And it's a great technique. I've got a video all about shear scraping. You're going to want to check that out if you haven't seen it already. Okay, so I'm going to flip the bowl around and we'll start working the interior of this piece. Black cherry is just a beautiful wood to turn. If you ever get an opportunity, basically any fruit wood or a nut-bearing tree is going to have just beautiful wood to turn. I don't know of any. There's probably one or two out there that aren't that great to turn, but essentially any of the fruit or nut trees are really, really nice to turn. Okay, so I'm going to rough out some of the material along the center top edge of this and kind of cut that bark back and work my way up to the edge of this bowl. And then I'll establish the wall thickness. And just as I was fearing, that bark is super fragile and it is not holding on. We just lost some bark there. And that'll be okay. This is going to be a natural edge piece now instead of a live edge piece. My niece, Addie, knows the difference between a natural edge and a live edge bowl, and I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully Addie's watching right now. Maybe she'll leave a comment later. Hi, Addie. And Abram. And Arlo. And Amelia. I have 4 nieces and nephews with A names, and I have Reagan and Ryan are also a niece and nephew of mine that watch my videos. It's actually pretty fun. So we'll see if any of them have watched this video to this point and leave a comment. That would be really fun. Okay, so I've established the thickness of the walls of this bowl. And now I'm using my technique where I work from the outside of the bowl down to the center. And the reason I use this technique is specifically for live edge and natural edge bowls because of this wing aspect. As the bowl becomes hollowed out, those wings are going to vibrate and flap. They will move. And if you try to go up to those wings and make a cut when they're vibrating like that, you're going to have a nasty catch at best, and you're going to do some damage to the bowl. If not, you're going to leave some nasty tool marks. So instead, what I do is I leave that center mass intact while I'm working those wings, and I get the wall thickness to where I want. And then I work down the side walls just a little bit at a time, but I don't return back to the top of those wings. This gives me, the center mass of this bowl right now is giving me support. So it's holding the area that I'm working right here. You can see right along the wall, that area is well supported by the center mass. It doesn't have the ability to flex or expand and contract very much. Now the wings that are out on the tip now, they're not quite as well supported at this point, and they are flexing. And that's why I don't want to go back up there to cut any of that material. And then I just like this technique, so I use this technique for my regular bowls too. The round rimmed bowls, I use this technique as well. I think it works well. And then essentially I'm just working each section down to match the thickness of the previous section. And if you saw there, what I'm doing is I'm backing up the bowl gouge and I'm just gently rubbing the bevel and the heel of the bevel to see that I'm getting contact right at the point where those two edges match. And here you can see how thin that is. Light is passing right through this wood. It's less than 1/8 of an inch, which is about 3 millimeters. And that bark, you can see how soft and tender that bark is. It's just coming straight off. So I could try to maintain that bark, but it's just going to be a struggle and it's going to continue to want to come off. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that off and not hassle with it. I just realized this kind of looks like a cowboy hat. Maybe I should turn a cowboy hat at some point. That would be a little bit of a challenge. I would have to flip this over and hollow out that cone in the center, but I guess it would be possible. Here you can see how I reduce the center mass area and then clean up the area next to where I'm going, the next section that I'll be working down the interior wall. And as I get closer to the wall thickness, I'm making lighter cuts and just sneaking up on it. There I'm rubbing and then I'm catching that edge of the previous high spot. And then it's always a good idea to stop and then check. Use your fingers to check that wall thickness. If it feels good, then you're good. If it feels a little thick, then make another pass and shave off just a little bit. I like to think of it as like sneaking up on the wall thickness. You want to gradually work your way up to the proper wall thickness without going too far, because the last thing you want is to be this far down inside the bowl and make the wall thinner than the previous areas, because like I said before, you can't go back up these sidewalls now at this point because they're vibrating. It doesn't appear as if they are, but they are definitely flexing as they rotate, so we do not want to be going up the sidewalls at this point. You can see all the water coming out of the wood as well. What is happening is the end grain on the sides of this bowl are kind of like straws. If you've ever placed a straw down into your drink and then put your finger over the end of the straw and lifted it up, well, you can see how the vacuum holds the water inside that straw. Here you can see I'm going to rub the heel and then just gently pick up the area and merge those two areas together. If you put your finger over the end of that straw and pull the straw out of your drink, the liquid stays in the straw. But as soon as you let go of the end of the straw, the liquid goes out of the straw. Well, when you're turning wet wood and you turn the outside and then you turn the inside, it's kind of the same technique. The end grain going through the end of the bowl are like those straws. There's nothing supporting them from behind, so the water just goes shooting out the end of them. And the end grain will dry much faster than the side grain, but when the walls are thin like this, they're going to dry relatively quick, both the side and the end grain. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. I essentially do most of my work with those two profiled bowl gouges, the 1/2 inch version, which you see here for the finishing cuts, and the 5/8 inch for the roughing cuts. You really don't need many other tools. I do use the spindle detail gouge to establish the angle on my dovetail for the tenon, but other than that, it's just these two tools. So I'm just gently rubbing as I pull the tool back and then picking up that cut. And you don't want to race across the center of the bottom of the bowl because it's an easy way to rip out ingrained fibers and create a little hole in the bottom of the center of the bowl. We don't want that. So take your time and just make some light cuts here. Now remember, the rotation speed of the center of this bowl is the slowest part of the entire bowl. The outside of the bowl is rotating much faster than the center. So you have to wait a little bit longer to make these nice clean cuts in the center bottom of the bowl. So just go across that center nice and slow until the material's cut. There it is. I love looking at the grain and the texture and just the distances between each of the grain layers and why it's thick and thinner in different parts. It's very intriguing. And then you've got the heartwood in the center, which has the darker color to it, and you have the sapwood on the outside. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love working with wood. It's so fun, and it's so cool to be able to take a piece of wood that probably would be firewood or mulch or just wasted and turn it into something that's functional and usable, like a beautiful bowl. So I'm going to go around the piece and sand this. Now, when you're doing a live edge or a natural edge bowl, there's almost always going to be some type of tool marks up in the wings a little bit. So take your time with your more coarse grit. This is 120 grit that I'm using here. Take your time and level out those tool marks initially. If you don't get those tool marks now, they're not going to come out. So when you get the tool marks out at this point, then each of the subsequent layers or versions of the sandpaper are going to just make the wood smoother, and you won't have to deal with those marks. All right, so now I'm going to take the tenon and the shoulder off the bowl, and I'm going to use that tenon to shape the foot of the bowl. And I'm going to do that using a jam chuck. This is a piece of camphor wood that's been sitting around a little bit. It's got a few little cracks in it. Those aren't structural cracks, but I know that this wood has moved a little bit, and you can see the end of it there is vibrating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and turn the center of this, the front of it, so that it rotates smoothly, so the bowl doesn't wobble. Like you can see the very front of this wobbling. Well, the only thing I need to do is cut off the front section of this, and the front will rotate properly where the bowl is going to be contacting the jam chuck. So that will have a nice clean rotation. That's all we need. It's kind of funny because the grain of the wood there makes it look like the piece is actually still vibrating, but it really isn't. So I'm going to bring the tailstock up and apply a little bit of pressure. I'm using the foam pad on there so the inside of the bowl, which is finished and sanded, doesn't get damaged. And now I'm going to make push cuts into the tenon and the shoulder just to start shaping the foot of this bowl. This is part of the reason why I gravitate towards tenon and shoulders so much, is I can easily create all sorts of different foot or options for the foot of a bowl when I have that extra material there. If I have a cavity for a recessed mortise, it's not so easy to create a new shape and make a nice pedestal foot for the bowl like I'm doing here. Now I'm going to use the shear scrape to reduce the level of the material there. Just gently using that lower wing, shaving it down. Think of the shear scrape as a shaving technique, because that's pretty much what it is. It's going to shave it down to where it merges to the previous area. Very light shear scraping here. I don't have to remove much material at all. That looks good. It's roughed up the material or the surface a little bit, so I'm just going to go ahead and sand through all the grits of the area that I just worked so that it blends in with the rest of the exterior of the bowl. And now I'm going to shape the foot itself. I'm going to make this angled, almost like the angle of the dovetail. It's about a 10 or 12 degree angle going down into the side of that. I'm just going to clean that up, give it a nice crisp edge there. And now I'm going to go across the bottom of the foot and start scooping that out. What I'm doing here is I want to make the thickness of the bowl consistent throughout. So if I have this big thick foot on the bowl, that's going to be a little bit of a problem because this whole bowl is wet and that thick area is not going to dry as fast as the thin area or the rest of the bowl. So I need to take my time and thin out the bottom of this foot so that it is approximately the same thickness as the rest of the bowl. It's as if the bottom, or it's as if the exterior of the bowl shape just continues right through the foot of this bowl. And the foot is really just like this little ring that's attached to this bowl shape. That's kind of what you create. And then we'll apply a little pressure into that center point to weaken those fibers. Take off that nub. And then I will sand that area at the center of the bottom of the bowl. You know, I found that the jam chuck is really a great way to go for reversing bowls and taking off the foot or shaping the foot. It is so versatile and it just works so well, especially for something like this where I've got those wings. I can't attach this to most other chucks, and with the thin wall like that, I've actually found that the vacuum chucks will actually pull air through the wood itself, through the fibers of the wood. There I'm sanding that nub off so that the bottom of the bowl is nice and smooth. So as simple as it is, the jam chuck is the way to go. I just really enjoy using the jam chuck for shaping the bottoms of the bowl. All right, so I'm going to apply some finish. Now, I'm going to use a simple Danish oil, which is pure linseed oil. This is polymerized linseed oil, and this is the tried and true brand Danish oil. Just putting a very thin coat on to coat the surface, and that's it. And there's a couple things that'll happen. This actually will help seal the wood, and it kind of seals some of that moisture in, so it slows the drying process. So the drying process doesn't happen so abruptly. It will continue to dry. This wood breathes, or it still has the ability to release the moisture even though there's an oil finish on it. What I've found is using this oil somewhat stabilizes the drying process, and it kind of makes it dry a little bit more evenly. But a piece this thin, like I said earlier, this is going to dry very quickly. So we put a thin coat on, and it only sits for 10-15 minutes, and then you wipe off any excess, and that's it. If you notice, I actually dipped my rag in the oil once, and I squeegeed off all the excess, and that is more than enough oil for this entire bowl. That cherry just looks absolutely gorgeous with the oil on it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh this, and I'm going to weigh this in grams. Unfortunately, I didn't have my camera angle over there, but it's 91 grams is what it weighed initially. Right after turning, it's 91 grams. Four days later, I came back, and it's now 75 grams. It's essentially lost 20% of its weight, and it's pretty much dry. It's a very dry piece of wood that you don't feel the moisture in it, you don't feel any flexing in it, but it has changed and distorted. Look at the shape of the base. It's not flat anymore. So we need to remedy that. And if you had a chance to see my previous video on how to make this sanding disc, if you haven't seen it, you definitely want to check that out. But this is one of the main reasons I made this sanding disc, was to quickly take off the high spots of the feet of these bowls. Just a quick little sanding like that, and ta-da, the bowl sits flat and there's no more vibration. So what I'm going to do at this point, and you can hear how dry that is, I'm going to use a little 4/0 steel wool and sand down the surface just real quick. Applying the oil to the wet wood does raise the grain just a touch. It's almost not noticeable. The wood still feels relatively smooth, but by running the sandpaper over this, it just reduces any kind of fibers that may have been raised. And then I'll put another coat of the tried and true Danish oil over the surface of this bowl, and we will be done with this piece. The Danish oil can be built up too. If you want to create a shine, you can put many coats of this Danish oil on until it's basically creating a shine on the wood surface. I found that 1 or 2 coats works great for what I want. It doesn't create a shine, but it has a nice luster to it and it's protecting the wood. I really like that. And check out this piece. It's really simple, but it's clean and elegant, and you can see light through it. I love that. I love looking at those wood grains. We get to peer into the side of a wood, of a tree, and see the cross section of a tree. It's actually very, very cool. Love these bowls. Here's the final natural edge cherry bowl. I think it turned out pretty well. We've got very thin walls, thin enough that we can actually see light through the end grain, which is pretty cool. And I waited 4 days so that you guys could see. I wanted to show you guys the actual piece after 4 days, because in 4 days' time, the piece is dry. Now that has to do with a couple things. It has to do with the fact that the walls are thin and the fact that they are even throughout. There's no thick spots in here. If we have thick spots, those thick areas are going to retain moisture, and that's potentially going to cause cracking as well. So we want to make sure we have really even walls, and in this case, to get it dry quickly, naturally dry quickly, you want the walls to be very thin. Understanding green wood and raw timber can be a little bit tricky. That's why I developed an online course called Treatable Understanding Green Wood. In that course, I'm going to explain everything you need to know for managing raw timber and taking logs and turning them into beautiful bowls like this without having all those nasty cracks. So if you want to avoid cracks and you want to understand timber just a little bit better so that you can turn that much better, then check out my online course. I'll put a link to in the description below so you can check that out. Let me know what you think of this bowl. Leave me a comment. And if you haven't already, do me a favor and click that like button below the screen. I greatly appreciate that. All right, guys, until next time, as always, happy turning.